I was just clinically depressed, absolutely rock bottom. And I was playing sports arenas at the time. I had a number 1 hit at the time. And that's where I was.
Hello and welcome to the Mindset and Self-Mastery Show. I'm your host, Nick McGowan. Today on the show, I have Christian Ray Flores. Christian, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Nick. Thanks for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you on. I was talking about how it's interesting having conversations with people who have their own show or are on tons of different podcasts and how we can just get into really great conversations. And it's funny to me when I have conversations with people up front, just kind of shooting the breeze, that there are some times where I'm like, oh my God, we need to record. Just hit the damn button because we just keep talking. And you and I were about to fall into that spot. So I think it's going to be a great conversation. And there's a lot that you've already gone through throughout your life. And it feels like, just based on a little bit of conversation we're having, there's so much more ahead for you. So why don't you kick us off? Tell us what you do for a living and what's one thing that most people don't know about you that's maybe a little odd or bizarre.
I have a lot of things that are bizarre about me, nice. But about me, what I do, it's also bizarre because basically I run a couple of businesses and I'm in 2 nonprofit sort of situations. One is I have a marketing agency, so we do video, graphic, storytelling stuff, both for businesses and for essentially authority marketing. That's sort of a good term to use. And I run a coaching program. This is actually the newer thing for high achievers who basically hit a ceiling, that invisible ceiling that you go, I'm not sure exactly how to grow from here. So that's what I do. So that's sort of my passion thing. I love doing that. I've loved, mentoring entrepreneurs, artists, athletes for 25 years now. And I'm a pastor at a small church that I started 10 years ago here in Austin, Texas. And I have a nonprofit that does 2 things. We have an after-school academy in Mozambique in Africa. And I can tell you all kinds of stories that led to that. And we do work. We have done work for the refugees in Ukraine. That's sort of a recent new thing. And the Ascend Mission Fund. So if you want to look it up, Ascend Mission Fund, that's where it is. Okay, so that's it. Quick, right?
Well, good talking to you. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah. Those are the things. So weird thing. Oh my gosh. I mean, geez. I have to just pick one. Okay, one that I've never mentioned anywhere, that I've helped several Russian members of the Russian mafia clean up their act and get out of the mafia.
I'm really glad that...
I don't think I've ever said that on air. I've never said that on air. This is a long time ago, but that's an interesting experience that I'll never forget, and I'll cherish for as long as I live.
What a weird statement to be able to say. To be able to help
you
them
asked for weird.
Yeah, I know, and I get that, which is so awesome. Being able to think back to that. Let's see, if people try to connect to that in any way, they could say, I had a friend maybe in school or at one job where I was able to speak some wisdom to them or love on them a little bit, but not many people could be like, you know what? I turned the ways of a couple mafia men.
Yes.
Got to give us some background to that.
Well, it was the 90s. I grew up on 4 different continents. I grew up in Russia, Chile, Germany, Africa, back to Russia, Ukraine, then to the U.S. So that gives you a little bit of a geography over my life. And we can go into some backstories there as well. But in the 90s, I was in Russia, and I became a Christian there. And, a lot of these guys in the mafia, obviously they were conflicted, right? Mm-hmm. So I helped a few of them actually leave the life of crime, and it was fascinating because of the type of people they are, right? So I have actually a deep admiration for them, not because they did evil things, but because these are people that are like adventurous. They're like cowboys, right? They're like gunslingers, quite literally, but they have passion, they have boldness, and they also have a weird, interesting spirituality about them as well. Like they have respect for scripture, for example, which is like you would never know. And they have anger issues. So combine that into a body of somebody who can literally kill you with their bare hands, and you can imagine some of those conversations. It was interesting.
I bet. So how did you get into the conversation to begin with? That's kind of the big question.
Okay, I have literally a whole series of them, right? But I'll tell you one conversation. So I was cheering up a buddy of mine who was a lightweight Greco-Roman wrestler, and he was a member of my church. And a bunch of us showed up to cheer him up, and it was like a local championship. Another guy who was the heavyweight Greco-Roman, second in all of Russia, but second after. If you are a Greco-Roman connoisseur, you can look up. Gosh, I just forgot his name. That's embarrassing. But there was this guy in Russia who is like the Muhammad Ali, like the all-time. Okay. He's the GOAT, right? Alexander Karelin. Look him up and you'll see what kind of beast that person is. So my buddy Sergei Kanonenko was number 2 after him, heavyweight Greco-Roman. And he hated me. I had this long hair. I was in show business at the time. So, and the Greco-Roman world was actually controlled by the Russian mafia, like quite literally financed, organized, housed, everything. Like, so these guys were training, financed, and then they were also the enforcers, the muscle. Yeah. At the same time, this is the 90s. It's like the Wild West in Russia. So I'm we're in the locker room, and this guy corners me, and he's massive. Like he can kill me like so easily. So he corners me into like the wall, and he just yells at me, and he goes like, "What are you doing? And you have this long hair. Who are you anyway?" And like you can imagine anger issues, right? And he goes, "Are you even a man?" And like he's just, and I actually don't remember saying that. He tells me that I said that because I think I was just completely terrified. Sure. But I basically interrupt him and say, "Are you a real man?" To this mountain of a man, right? Jeez. And he goes, "What?" And I go, "Well, if you're a real man, you'll follow Jesus." And he literally stopped what he was doing. And that night he started reading the Bible. A few weeks later, he literally left the mafia world. And that's a long story because I helped him get out of it. Like his boss came to my house with a gun, basically saying, "What are you doing to my boy?" This guy is now a pastor of a major church in Moscow, Russia.
Huh. Wow.
How is that for weird?
Well, I don't think that's as weird as much as that's one of those divine calling moments that it's like, you needed to say that.
It was amazing.
He needed to go.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a cool thing. I mean, if that wasn't one of those moments, you may not be here right now to have this conversation. If he was like, follow who? I could have snap.
I could have completely, not made it out of there for sure.
Yeah. He could have been like, "I'm not following anybody," and just broken you in half.
Yes.
But what an interesting thing, especially for you to not think about that or to really almost even recall it. And for him to be like, "This is what you said."
Yeah. Yeah. I think I was just scared. So scared. I just, decided to say that. I don't know why.
I appreciate you being honest.
But it worked.
I think there are a lot of people. Yeah. There are a lot of people that are in your shoes who are a pastor as well. That would be like, "You know what? It was straight up 100% Jesus speaking directly through me." You were like, I was terrified. Absolutely terrified. and God was still like, hold on, I got you. Hold my drink.
That's exactly. Yeah. It was amazing. Yeah, I have so many of those, but it's sort of along the same lines. Very dramatic. He's one of my best friends. Became my roommate, by the way, because he got kicked out of everything and lost everything: his livelihood, place to live, everything, and he didn't have any other skills. So I'm like, just move in.
Come on in. No, at least you're protected. Like if somebody tried to get in, you're like, we got the bruiser. We're totally good.
Here's my muscle. Yeah.
Wow. So you've mentioned that you've lived on 4 different continents. One of the things that you hadn't mentioned that I think must have been a big thing was you mentioned a little bit with being in show business. So I want to talk about some of that. But why don't you start from the beginning and give us a kind of the higher overview of how you were a little kid, where you were, how you ended up seeing the fall of Soviet Russia, and what happened, how you became a recording artist, like all of that mixed to become who you are. But give us the overview of that so then we can dive in a bit further.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in Moscow, and my mom was Russian, my dad's Chilean. So like if you're watching this, not listening to it, I look completely Latin, right? Like I don't look Slavic at all. It's because of my dad. So we moved to Chile when I was like 4 years old, and my mom and dad were both Marxists, and all of that stuff. And at the time, they were about to elect the first socialist, democratically elected, actually, socialist president in history, and he was elected in Chile. Well, the military didn't like that, and they overthrew the president, bombed the thing, and bombed his presidential palace. He got killed, and they proceeded to arrest hundreds of thousands of people and put them in concentration camps. And so it was like mass persecution. I mean, the numbers vary greatly, but some people say about 250,000 total, right? Were detained, arrested, many of them tortured, killed, electrocuted, disappeared without notice. If you've heard the song "They Dance Alone" by Sting, that's what it's about. And my dad was in a concentration camp. And my mom and my sister and I were in hiding. So she had like a fake passport. She had a gun just in case. And we were like completely underground. And my first childhood memory is standing outside of the concentration camp. They put him in soccer stadiums because they ran out of prisons. They didn't have enough space. So they had these soccer stadiums full of people, right? And so she was standing outside of this fence, and I was holding her hand. That was my first childhood memory. And she was trying to talk to the soldier, like a guard, and trying to pass food for my dad. And like a little, like paper bag or something like that. And which he actually never got, we eventually learned. And then after he was released, he was one of the lucky ones. We were also one of the lucky ones because we were accepted into a refugee camp that was overseen by the United Nations. So the military couldn't come in. And so we were protected that way. And eventually we got asylum in Germany. Didn't stay there for super long, for just probably about a year. Back to the Soviet Union. My mom was so shell-shocked. We were set up. We experienced a lot of poverty there. Lived in a communal apartment. It's just Soviet Union at its worst, right? And then my dad got a contract to work in Mozambique in Africa. And that's where I grew up. I grew up in Africa. From 7 to 14, I was there. It was there. Also, we had food shortages, civil war, bombings, stuff like that. And back to the Soviet Union after they got divorced. And it was like, again, from Africa to the worst of the Soviet Union, 1-bedroom apartment, 3 people, my mom, my sister, and I, single mom, raised me. Food shortages again, and I went to college there, and I literally graduated with a master's degree in economics the year the Soviet Union fell apart, 1991. And in 93, I went into show business and just was lucky enough to see success very, very quickly. In about a year, I was on national television, and then I was everywhere, magazine covers, radio, TV, albums, shows, from small venues all the way to big venues like sports arena level type fame. So that's the quick version of it.
Well done with the quick version. I'm sure there's a lot of details that go into all of that.
Yeah.
I know as a musician that there's solace that can come from playing music and creating your art. No matter what is going on, you're able to dive into that. So what was that like for you to be able to be that artist through and through all of that to then become who you were?
I think it's nature and nurture. We will never know, to be honest with you. My theory is that artists usually have suffering in their past, right? Because there's an emotional muscle that you develop over time. And then many artists have also, I think, a variety of experiences that are just different. And I have like this plethora of experiences, cultures. And I think those are the things that contributed to the artistry. And that's my theory. I'm not sure. But I think that gives you these superpowers, the ability to connect human to human nature. That would be my guess. In my case, I had to learn, like I literally moved 4 countries by age 7 and learned 4 languages by age 9. So it was just relentless stuff, right? Like you go from place to place, from country to country, people look differently. The body language is different. The language is different. How they communicate, how they relate to each other is all different. And it was painful. My dad tells me when we moved to Africa, I was sort of quiet for a full year. Like when he would bring me to social sort of things, gatherings or whatever, and I was just there, not saying anything. And I think I was just shell shocked. I was so confused, didn't know, where I belonged and everything. And that was sort of the trauma that helped me develop some superpowers, right? And there's one of the things I do in my coaching program is that I interview top experts in the world about this stuff. And one of them about Ben Shahar, he tells me about this thing in psychology that most psychology students in the first year don't even know about. Everybody talks about PTSD, but no one talks about PTG, post-traumatic growth. And that's what happens, and trauma makes you more stronger, more resilient, more creative, gives you cognitive abilities that most people don't have. Some of this. So I'm grateful, super grateful for the trauma early on, that especially the layers, right? It's culture, it's danger, it's civil war, it's military goods, you get really acquainted with suffering and fear and uncertainty, and I think if you you're wired a certain way or just make some choices on how to interpret that, it gives you the ability to really, really succeed and flourish in life because you're not scared by uncertainty. You don't, interpret risk the same way other people do. You relate to people. I think that's the biggie for me, is that I realized that because I was trying to read body language and tone and intonations and words, that gave me almost like this supernatural ability to understand a human being and relate. And it works really well in marketing, obviously. If you're trying to communicate, it works really well if you're a coach. It works really well if you're a musician, right? Because you're trying to, communicate a sentiment that will resonate with the mass audience, right? You write a song about love and you want, millions of people to go, yeah, that's how I feel. And I think all of that, in my theory, is that all of that is rooted in all that early childhood trauma.
I'm right there with you with that same theory, but I also think that most everything is rooted in childhood trauma, no matter what it is.
Right.
You can tie back everything to something that shaped you in those early handful of years.
Yes, absolutely.
As you've talked through this, I'm thinking, man, some people have a hard enough time when they're a little kid, like moving to a different house or a different town, away from their buddies. Right. Even if it's in the same area, they go to the same school or whatever, like, oh no, you moved a couple blocks away. And you're like, I moved multiple countries, multiple continents. And what a beautiful way to be able to look at that and go, yeah, there was all of that and craziness in every spot that we went to, and danger and trauma from each and every spot of it, that I am totally aware of the growth that comes from that sort of stuff. But it is a choice to be able to actually do that. You and I could be having a totally different conversation. You could be blaming every single bit and every single piece of that. Now, do you think that there was some of that you actually did for a little while? And just didn't hold on to it, though? Or was it something where you were kind of nurtured out of that?
I think it's both. A lot of it is nurtured out as well. But, and honestly, I can't take credit. I honestly can't. Because it's so early on, all of this stuff continued well into my teenage years. And, even with the last move it was a divorce. It really deeply traumatized me. But I would say it's a combination, I think, of something that was just some muscles grew on their own. But some of the stuff, yes. For example, one specific thing that really did me in is my parents' divorce, right? I couldn't find my way out of it. And I literally, that's sort of my breaking point was not civil war, not danger, not moving, not sort of this risk or even lack of safety or lack of material resources. It was this primal fear of the heartache that happens with divorce. So I was growing up, and I would just literally sabotage every single romantic relationship I had. I would cheat, lie, be a jerk, draw somebody, just try to push the person away. And I hurt myself, hurt other people. And that thing I just couldn't get over it. And I had to get a lot of coaching to change that. And that's part of the reason why I'm coaching now, is because I realized that coaching in the ability to being coachable, right? Having access to a coach that gets you, but being coachable, having that humble, hungry, willing, eager heart is massive, right? And I had that. But I couldn't have gotten out of it without that kind of thing. And it accelerates your growth in tremendous ways. So I just was lucky enough to have this one man in my life, and he just healed me, like he just basically rewired my brain on how to do romance, for example. Yeah. Is that a good answer? Okay, answer?
I mean, there's no good or bad answers, I guess, when it comes to your life.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I find it interesting how that was the thing that broke you or really messed you up. But that is kind of telling in a sense. I'm sure you're more of a lover than a fighter. And if you watched your two parents that were in love being able to no longer hold on to that, and being younger and not knowing what do I do and not having that example from there, after all of that craziness, like even when you mentioned that a little earlier, you kind of slipped in just they got divorced and I moved back to Russia. It was like, wait a minute. What happened there? Mm-hmm. How did they get to that point through all of that and then go, you know what, we're done. We've been through a lot, so now we're done. Like, that's a bit much. And for that to actually take you and show you I can't do this anymore. Did that lean into when you were in show business? Like, was some of that part of that, the, you being public facing and kind of having anybody throw anything they want at you?
Yeah, it accelerated. It sort of revealed the dysfunction and the brokenness quicker, and amplified it tremendously, because basically I went from nobody, and I'm also another dimension for you. It's a minority. I'm a minority. Yeah. Right. I was born there, but I have darker skin. I've been a minority everywhere I've been, like literally everywhere. Every single country I've never been local because there's something odd about me. Right. In Africa, I'm not African, clearly. In Russia, I don't look Russian. In the U.S., I have an accent. Even in Chile, people quickly understand that I might look like them, but the minute I open my mouth, it's different, right? So that I have other sort of sources of cultural formation. But so this is just another layer, right? But with show business, I went from being this sort of, ugly duckling minority, like literally I was like one or two of us in the whole high school, for example, right? And luckily, my class actually, I didn't experience a ton of racism at all. People really loved me, and I'm so grateful for that. But I stood out. You can tell that I'm like the other, like I'm the foreigner. And I went from that to all of a sudden being you go from ugly to exotic, or from like minority to exotic. So if you're famous and look different, then you're exotic, and so I became this sort of, they called me the sex symbol of, whatever, like, so you go from that to literally millions of women, teenagers and young women having posters on their walls and all of that, right? All of that bizarre over the top stuff. And that actually doesn't help at all, because this is not normal. That's just so not normal. And you don't know, and I was already unprepared, right, for romance. Now that threw me over the edge very quickly. Like I didn't know what to do with that at all. And of course, it was just too much. It was just too much. I couldn't handle it, basically.
So when you shut down, you started to kind of break apart from that. Obviously, coaching has helped with that. But how did you get to the point where you knew I've got a problem? And I think that's one of the big things for people that listen to this show. It's like, look, they're going through stuff. People may not have gone through the exact same things you've gone through, or had millions of women throwing themselves or putting your posters up on their walls or anything like that. But they still, I think it's all universal in the sense that we try to figure out, how do we get through the stuff that we're trying to get through? How do I actually get past it? So how did you get through that trauma? Not only just the trauma with your parents getting a divorce and what came of that, but all the other traumas. Like what sort of modalities, trainings, even coachings and things of that sort, do you feel really actually did the trick for you and helped you work through? And what did that look like?
Well, I think it honestly starts with understanding you're tolerating something that's unhealthy, right? So in my mind is, of course there's signals early on. Everybody has those signals, right? You have a hint that you have a weak spot or a blind spot, right? Of course you do. Life sends you signals. Your surroundings send you signals. Your work situation sends you signals that you are whatever, lacking in something. So with romance, I had very clear signals. Okay, like what's the common denominator of all those breakups? Moi. What do you do with that? You decide to brush it aside, self-medicate, or just ignore it and do the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. That's what we do. And there comes a point, and that's sort of the self-awareness challenge, right? If you're self-aware enough, maybe this is like this, listening to this podcast will help you go before it gets extreme to go, I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to ask for help, right? But for me, I was a knucklehead. What brought me to my knees was I started dating this girl, and she was, I was sort of this perfect cliche. So I had to date a runway model, and she was a runway model, and she was popular. And I'm like, I'm being completely honest. My motivation with this, I had no plans of marrying her. I was like, we're going to probably look really good in magazines. That's literally how I was thinking at the time. It was just the most shallow, cliche type person. And she got pregnant, and we had a baby, and I was freaking out, because all of those things were flaring up in me, and I just treated her terribly. I wasn't violent or anything like that, but I was definitely a jerk, and she left because it wasn't a safe bet, and she took my kid with me, my oldest daughter, Diana. And that was the trigger. That was the bottom of, rock bottom. I can't. I don't know how to live. That's sort of, I remember having that thought over and over again. I don't know how to live. And I was already thin. I lost more weight. I was just clinically depressed, absolutely rock bottom. And I was playing sports arenas at the time. I had a number one hit at the time. And that's where I was. So I would say to you, if you're listening to this, don't wait until it gets to that. Be proactive, just be proactive. Have the good sense, the self-awareness to do something radical and take massive action before you hit a place where you have so much pain that you're gonna feel it for a long time. So that was sort of my thing with that triggered it. But the benefit of that, I think for me, was that I was, I had so much success that it was hard to find humility in the midst of so much success. And when you're so unsuccessful at something, specifically with this, it gave me the humility and the urgency to say, I know nothing. I trust you. I found a man who just saved my life. And I will do literally anything you tell me, I will do. I will obey, So like I was a coachable on the level of, Karate Kid, like the boy who was following whatever his name was, it was like that, like Eastern philosophy, Kung Fu level obedience. That's where I was at in my posture. And that saved my life, because you need to be able to be coachable in on that level. And then you progress very quickly if you actually listen. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Your soil's ready at that point. You're,
yeah.
You're not able to get it or understand it before that. So do you still talk to your Mr. Miyagi? Do you still have a relationship with that person?
I do. Yeah, Mr. Miyagi. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, I do. I had lunch with him 3 weeks ago.
Nice.
He visits every once in a while. Yeah, yeah.
What a cool thing.
I owe him everything. I just love that guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I think everybody can feel like they've had some sort of love lost, some sort of situation where they can look back and go, man, I shouldn't have been a jerk. I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have done that, or whatever. But at a level of what you had gone through, having that relationship, having a baby, hitting tour after tour, and singles and all of those things that are going on, that can be a lot that could break somebody. That could be a lot that could actually really crush somebody. So in those dark moments when you knew things are really, really tough right now, what's the sort of protocol that you started to go through on your own, even after meeting your Mr. Miyagi or, leading up to it? But looking back, are you able to say, like, I could see how I was starting to be self-aware and kind of move along through it? Like, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, thank you for asking. And I think before I even met Mr. Miyagi, I went to my mom, and I think that's actually a really important insight is family is everything. And if you're lucky enough to have a caring parent in your life or both, I didn't have my dad with me. He was physically, I have good memories of him, but he was not present in my life at the time. But I was with my mom and I was clinically depressed and I would just seek her out and I would just hold her hand. Like, that's how bad it was. I would just sit there and I wanted to hold her hand. Like, that's all. That's the relief I got, right? It's just pretty terrible if you think about it. But I think it's important. It's an important thing to note is that, yeah, you don't have to have a protocol or figure it out. Go to somebody who loves you, and stay close to them, and then you figure out the next steps, right? And for me, it was this changed my life. I mean, that's a lot of the stuff I still have in my coaching program. Is find somebody who is good at what you suck in, and listen attentively, and have sort of a Mr. Miyagi attitude, right? Towards that person is I will do everything you say, and that's not normal in culture, especially in American culture. It's not normal to be obedient. It's not normal to be humble. It's not normal to be vulnerable even. But because of that, I feel like we don't grow quickly enough. So and if you take that posture, it accelerates your growth. And I really believe in that deeply, deeply, deeply. That with that gentleman, and now I was, I think, his best student in that sense. Like, I was that guy who would do anything, right? Like, I'll give you an example, for example, very practical. I became a Christian, studied the Bible, became a Christian. This guy was a pastor. And he basically said, okay, you need to do A, B, and C when it comes to the lifestyle. And it was, let's put it that way, I didn't understand the words that were coming out of his mouth, right? Because the lifestyle of a pop star doesn't quite blend with scripture, right? And I literally was like, I don't even understand how you can live like that. I don't understand what you're saying to me, And he goes, well, this is what it says, and this is what's going to get you healthy, right? And I was like, all right. And I literally cold turkey, changed my lifestyle completely. Cold turkey in that moment. There was another moment where he was like, hey, there's this conference happening in Los Angeles. And I think it's going to really help you see just the journeys of the people, the speakers, the maturity, the insights. And I want you to go there because you're like, I was like 6 months in. And I was at the same time campaigning. This is another story. You can actually look it up if you Google Marxism and Christian Ray Flores. You'll see stuff. I was actually campaigning for Boris Yeltsin, the president. In his 1996, he had his re-election campaign. This was the last time the communists were about to come back, and they were winning. And the Boris Yeltsin's team chose my song as their anthem. And I was campaigning for him on television. I was touring. Also, they were paying us pretty well. And it was a life or death struggle, right? If the communists came back, losing my career was the best case scenario for me, right? So I was like all in against the communists, which is ironic, right? Because I was brought up by a couple of communists, and I was campaigning, and it was an important life or death historical election. It really was, and I'm like, I have a 12-city tour coinciding with that conference in Los Angeles, and I'm like, dude, I am on the side of good here, like participating in a historic election campaign, and they're using my song as the anthem for it. I'm a little busy right now. And he goes, well, yeah, but if you want to really grow, I think the timing is important. And I think you're just getting sort of established in this new journey. I think you should still go. And I'm like, all right. And I canceled the whole 12 city leg. It was one of the legs, like I did others, but I canceled the whole leg of a tour. And my whole team was livid, just because it's their livelihood. This is bread and butter for them, right? And they were like, dude, you lost your mind, but I obeyed, and sure enough, it helped me tremendously. He was right. Like, I saw people, incredibly accomplished people, who were living a life that I was just starting, and that was like Grammy Award winners and Hollywood producers and actors, and I was like, oh my gosh, I caught a vision for my life, So it really, really helped. And so that's just sort of one of the things, right? Is just find a Miyagi, be coachable, do everything they say. The other one was having a spiritual practice, right? And one of the things that I study quite a bit and have for a long time is even the top completely secular researchers on human flourishing will tell you that one of the core elements of success is to have a spiritual practice. So contemplation, prayer, scripture, engaging with ancient wisdom. And the reason for that is because you get a perspective of how the world works, how the universe works, how you fit in, why you're even on this earth in the first place. These are things that are really important for human beings. I don't care who you are.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, they really are. They're existential things that you have to put that piece of the puzzle somewhere, and it changes everything. So I started developing a prayer practice, a scriptural practice. I started practicing community with people. So on a level of, and that's another thing that all the research that has nothing to do with religion will tell you, is that the three most important things you'll have in life to flourish, the Harvard study, the 80-year-old longitudinal study of human flourishing will tell you, these are the three things. The four things is family, deep friendships, right? Faith and meaningful work. Four things. Those are the things that will make you happy, that you'll literally live longer. You'll do better. You'll be healthier, wealthier. You'll live longer, all across the board, right? So I started developing those dimensions, right? My family was okay, but I was, oh my gosh, it was so much better, right? I started developing deep, deep friendships. Most of my friendships were sort of superficial. It was either people I worked with or people I partied with. And I started developing deep, deep friendships with accountability, with love, with engagement. My work took a whole different meaning, right? So I started looking at my work as an act of service to the world. And that adds layers to the stuff that you do, right? And, for example, we started doing amazing philanthropy work, and I've never done it before at that point. So we're doing 2 festivals a year for about 3,000 plus orphans. It was unbelievable, the scale of it. So even my work took a whole different sense of meaning and depth, right? One of those festivals, Michael Jackson came. It was that awesome and big, So meaningful work, deep friendships, deeper family connections, and of course, I was working on my specific blind spot, which is romance. So I was sort of hanging out with I had 3 married guys who I was like, okay, if I can get what they have, I'm going to be set. And I would just literally invest in friendships with them, having meals with them. I would just I would position myself to be around them, their wives, and I would like torture them. Okay, so how do you find each other? How do you court? How do you know it was the one or she was the one, right? And I would like torture the wives as well. Like, I was like really weird. But I was that determined, right? And they would give me instructions. They would be like, well, here's the thing, here's the principle. And, I remember very vividly, I had a conversation with a buddy of mine, and we're like out having breakfast. And he was like, okay, so what is the list of what you're looking for in a woman? And I'm like, oh, boom, 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 boom. Like, that's easy, right? He's like, all right. I'm like, what's your list when you found your wife? And he gave me his list. And I'm like, I'm throwing away my list. I'm taking your list. It was that transformational, right? But you have to seek it. You have to be curious. You have to find who to learn from. And from those sort of building blocks, a whole new person was built, right? And to me, I'm so grateful and so I incorporate this stuff in what I do now, helping other people. And I never stopped. So I study all the experts. I talk to the experts. I had all this other stuff. So it's timeless stuff, it's tried stuff, things that I know works. And it's it's true stuff, meaning there's research. So if you're a Homo sapiens, if you have a pulse and a heart and you're a human being, this stuff will work for you, right? So that's what I love about it, is that the answers are there. It's not super complicated. It's really our willingness to look for them and incorporate them into your lives, and you're going to be set. You can have an amazing life.
You've brought up coachability and being coachable a bunch of times. You've even talked about it and hinted about it, but you've also specifically said you got to be coachable and you got to be open. And it sounds like you went through a situation, or, obviously situations, the moving, the baby, and all of that, and the change of your heart and the way that you looked at things. But coachable can kind of be a 4-letter word for some people. They're like, look, I get it. You got to be coachable. But there's more to it than that. What you're actually talking about is more of a recipe that ties in, that anchors things to why and how you were able to be coachable. So as a coach, you've gone through different conversations with people, I'm sure, where you're like, just get out of your own way. I've had conversations with people like that too, where you're like, you got to stop just being in your own way. You can't do it for them as the coach. You can love them through it, but they have to be willing, able, and ready to be able to do all of this. So the coachability and being coachable side of things is actually more of that recipe again. But what is it that you work with people on in your coaching to be able to maybe help them get to that point where they see that without going through some crazy life changing situation and still being able to have that change? So are you able to be a catalyst for that?
Honestly, the answer to that is I sell them on the dream. I sell them on the vision.
Okay.
I don't think there's another way to do it, because one of the advantages that I have is I see the future and I see what works and what the steps you need to take and the techniques and strategies that you need to employ. But they can't, and they can't. They are where they are. And I was literally, I had a session maybe a couple hours ago before we recorded this, where I was selling them. I was like, guys, I'm going to sell you. And I would just paint a picture and I would go, can you imagine, and let me show you how you get there. It's this, and this, and this. But then, yes, it's hard. Yes, it's overwhelming. Yes, it requires discipline, and you have to rearrange things and reprioritize things. And yes, it's emotional labor. And yes, it's fear, and you better get used to it. But I promise you, this is going to do this, and this. But I have to explain exactly what it's going to do and how it looks in your personal life, in your just personal sort of your space of peace and creativity and flexibility, how clearly you see your vision in your workspace, what it could mean for business, revenue, right? Can you imagine, like, if you are in this place, how would you be able to measure, even at least project, how this can help you in your business? And once you sort of create that little, step by step image, they can do whatever it is that motivates them, right? Because for some, it could be like, I work with some people that are Stanford graduates, Harvard graduates, and I go, give me the monetary significance of this, if this were to happen. And they were like, millions, tens of millions. I'm like, is it worth it for you to do this work? Heck to the yeah, and some of it is relational. Some of it is just peace. I just don't want to be stressed out anymore this way. I want to know how to manage stress or risk or uncertainty, right? What is it going to do for you to have a level of a creative space, a state of flow on demand? What would that do for you? And they can just fill in the blanks, right? What would that do for your family if you were to not, if you're a single guy and you really feel heartbroken and you sort of feel like you're a failure? But what if we tweak this and this and this and this? Do you think that's going to change the way you see women, dating, romance in general? Yeah. What would that lead to? I might find somebody who I can make a life with, create a life together. Well, what is that worth to you? A lot. Okay, start now. So basically, I sell it.
I love that you don't, no holds barred with that. You're like, straight up, just sell them all.
I literally use those words.
I just sell them.
Yeah, because I'm excited for them. Like I really believe this. So anyway, yeah.
But to be able to call that out in the beginning of it, I enjoy that that sort of sense of humor anyway, of like, look, this might sound like this, and this is how it's going to be because I am.
Yeah.
Now on with it.
Yeah, exactly.
Christian, look, it has been awesome having you on the show. I think we could just talk for hours and hours and hours, and I hope we continue to talk at some point. We do need to wrap this up a little bit. And before I let you go, what's that one piece of advice that you would give to somebody that's on their path towards self-mastery?
I would say, okay, there's a few, but I'll land on one. That your inner game will drive your outer game. Always. And the world and your surroundings and your culture and your job and whatever will tell you otherwise. They will measure your performance. They will measure what you can bring to the table, which is really important. It's not unimportant. But if you overinvest in your outer game and underinvest in your inner game, you're going to hit a ceiling that it's going to be hard for you to break through, and you're not going to reach your potential. The only way to reach greatness, if you develop your outer game, you'll have a career. If you work hard enough, you have talent, you have a work ethic. If you work on your inner game, you will have a calling. You will change the world. And I advise you to aim higher. For somebody to feel like they know that they have a calling, but they're not sure what it is or how to go about it, I love the idea of working on your inner game for your outer game, because there are a lot of times that we think we have to do the outer stuff. Like the outer stuff will get me this. If I get this job, if I make this sale, if I get this giant payday, if I have this woman or this man or whatever, then it'll all be. And that's honestly just BS. You've got to be able to work through that. So I'm glad that that's how we ended this. That's a great way to be able to put that. Again, before I let you go, where can people find you and where can they connect with you? You can just Google Christian Ray Flores and you'll find most of the stuff. ChristianRayFlores.com is a newsletter that is absolutely free, and it's called Headspace by Christian Ray Flores. And if you subscribe to it, it's all of the stuff. It's just tons of insights and content and interviews. Highly, highly recommend subscribing to that. If you want to get serious about actually getting help and progressing and accelerating your growth, go to exponential.life. And exponential is spelled without the E, so it's a cool way to say exponential. Starts with X, exponential.life, and you'll see the details of the coaching program.
Awesome, man. Again, thank you so much for being on the show, for being open and honest and going through everything you've gone through. I really appreciate your time.
Same here. It's an honor. Thank you.